Two sisters, one man, and a destiny sealed by deception and betrayal. One was cherished, the other overlooked, yet God chose the rejected one to carry out His promise. What seemed like a simple rivalry between sisters was in fact part of a much greater divine purpose, and centuries later, the consequences of their conflict would shape the destiny of an entire nation. Why was Jacob deceived? What was the real reason behind the bride swap? And what secret was Laban hiding all along? Stay with us until the end, because this is not the version of the story you heard in Sunday school or from the pulpit. What appeared as betrayal in the eyes of men, God used to bring about His perfect plan. The night spread across the desert like a cloak of shadows and silence. Jacob, weary from the long journey, searched for a place to rest. The path had been arduous, and his feet ached with every step. Ever since fleeing from his brother Esau, he had carried both fear and hope in his heart. But now, in this moment, all he longed for was rest. He found a stone, placed it as a pillow, and beneath the vast star-filled sky he closed his eyes. Sleep soon overtook him, and then came the dream. He saw a ladder reaching up to the heavens, rising majestically as far as his eyes could see. Angels ascended and descended upon it in a constant, harmonious motion, as if following a divine order. At the top, a radiant light shone, illuminating everything around it. Jacob's heart pounded as he heard a voice, deep, powerful, yet gentle at the same time. I am the Lord, the God of Abraham and Isaac. The land on which you now sleep I will give to you and your descendants. I will be with you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have fulfilled what I have promised you. The impact of those words jolted him awake. The air felt heavier, charged with a sacred presence. His chest rose and fell quickly, and his heart raced. Sitting up, he looked around. The night still lingered, and the sky sparkled with thousands of silent stars. But inside him something had changed. This place is sacred, he murmured as he slowly rose. Surely God Himself was here, and I did not know it. With reverence, he took the stone on which he had slept and set it upright as a memorial. He poured oil over it, consecrating that piece of land, and named it Bethel, the house of God. There, before the unseen Lord, he made a vow: if God is with me on this journey, if He protects me, gives me bread to eat and clothes to wear, and allows me to return in peace to my father's house, then the Lord shall be my God. With the first light of dawn, Jacob resumed his journey. His destination was Haran, the land of his uncle Laban. He did not know what awaited him there, but his heart was now filled with a new certainty: God was with him. The sun climbed higher in the sky as Jacob walked along the dry, dusty path. The heat was intense, and his throat quickly grew parched. After hours of weary steps, he finally spotted a well nearby. Shepherds rested in the shade of a few trees, waiting. The mouth of the well was sealed with a large stone, and the men seemed to be waiting for the right moment to roll it away together. As Jacob observed the scene, his eyes were drawn to a young woman approaching. She led a flock of sheep, moving with grace. There was something about her that seemed to shine beneath the sun. Her dark hair swayed gently in the wind, and her gaze carried an enchanting sweetness. Jacob's heart pounded. He had never seen anyone like her. "Who is she?" he asked one of the shepherds. "Rachel, Laban's daughter," the man replied. The name echoed in Jacob's mind like a melody. As she approached, Jacob's throat went dry, but he could not look away. It was as if time itself had slowed. When their eyes met, an invisible current seemed to connect them. Suddenly, driven by a bold impulse, Jacob stepped forward and single-handedly rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well. The shepherds watched in astonishment as he drew water and gave it to Rachel's sheep. He spoke no words, yet overcome with emotion, Jacob wept. Rachel looked at him with curious eyes. Who was this man who had entered her life like an unexpected storm? Neither of them knew that this encounter would change their lives forever. Jacob walked beside Rachel as she led her sheep to the pasture. The silence between them was filled only by the bleating of the animals and the rustling of the wind through the trees. Rachel glanced at him curiously, trying to understand who this stranger was, who had shown such deep emotion the moment he saw her. When they arrived at Laban's house, a servant announced their presence. Laban himself came out to greet them, and when he saw Jacob, he broke into a wide smile. "You are the son of my sister Rebekah," he exclaimed, embracing him warmly. "You are my own flesh and blood. Come in, stay in my house." Jacob recounted his journey, speaking of Bethel and the dream he had experienced. Laban listened with interest, though his sharp eyes studied the young man with a calculating gleam. It was clear Jacob was strong and hard-working, a man of great value. Days passed, and Jacob remained in his uncle's house. From the very first morning he offered his help, tending the flocks and organizing the pasture. Over time he became indispensable. Laban, realizing his worth, decided to propose an agreement. "You are my relative, and you should not serve me for nothing. Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Jacob did not hesitate, for his heart had already decided. "I will work for 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter." Laban raised an eyebrow. Rachel was his treasured jewel, the most beautiful of his daughters, but 7 years of hard labor was worth much. He smiled and said, "It is better that I give her to you than to another man. Stay with me." And so the agreement was sealed. Jacob would work for 7 years for Rachel, and at the end of that time she would become his wife. The days turned into months, and the months into years. For Jacob, time seemed to fly, for his love for Rachel grew with each new dawn. Her gaze, the sound of her laughter, the way she moved her hands while tending the sheep, everything about her stirred his heart, and he longed to have her by his side forever. At last the 7th year arrived. Jacob stood before Laban, his eyes shining with joy and confidence. "The time is fulfilled," he said. "Give me my wife now so that I may be united with her." Laban nodded slowly, but within him a different plan was already taking shape. Jacob had no idea what awaited him. For years, Jacob had labored faithfully in Laban's service. From dawn until dusk he worked tirelessly in the fields, tending the flocks, leading the sheep to the best pastures, protecting them from predators and the chill of the night. His arms grew strong and his skin toughened under the burning sun. But through it all, one thought sustained him, Rachel. The love he felt for her made every sacrifice seem light. Even on the hardest days, when the sun scorched his back and the weight of labor bent his body, just catching sight of her in the distance among the sheep was enough to renew his strength. He longed for the day when he could finally call Rachel his wife, when she would truly be his, and together they could build a life side by side. Rachel, too, had a special affection for Jacob. From the very first day, she was drawn to his determination and kindness. As the years passed, their bond grew stronger. It was impossible to hide. The stolen glances, the gentle smiles, the moments when Jacob went out of his way to help her with small tasks, even when she didn't truly need it. But not everyone shared in the joy of their love. Leah, Rachel's older sister, watched everything in silence. While everyone admired Rachel's beauty and grace, few noticed Leah. Her eyes carried a quiet tenderness, but her future seemed uncertain. Unlike her younger sister, Leah was not seen as beautiful. Her presence was quiet, her voice soft, her gestures always careful not to draw attention, yet in her heart she carried a secret sorrow. With each passing day, every time she saw Jacob smiling at Rachel, her chest tightened. Time did not erase the silent ache growing within her. Leah knew that according to tradition, the eldest daughter should be married before the younger. But what would become of her? Would any man ever choose her? Laban was also aware of this tradition, and it troubled him. If Rachel married first, who would take Leah? No suitor had shown interest in her, and the thought of having an unmarried daughter in his home for life was a heavy burden on him. As the 7 years drew near their end, Laban began searching for a solution. His shrewd eyes looked for a way to secure Leah's future without losing the benefits of Jacob's hard work. Jacob, however, hardly noticed what was happening around him. His heart was filled only with Rachel, counting down the days until he could finally take her as his wife. When the final day of service arrived, Jacob felt an uncontrollable surge of joy. His work was complete. He had fulfilled his part of the agreement, and now it was time to receive his bride. With his heart pounding, he stood before Laban and said, "The time is fulfilled. Give me my wife, so that I may be united with her." Laban looked at him with an enigmatic smile, nodded slowly, and replied, "We shall hold a great feast to celebrate. Tonight you will take your wife." Jacob's heart overflowed with happiness. The long-awaited day had finally come. But what he did not know was that even as he rejoiced, another plan was already in motion. His love for Rachel was strong, but destiny had already been written. That night, the celebration began with great fanfare. Laban's camp filled with guests, servants, and distant relatives. Wine flowed freely, torches lit up the night, and voices rose in songs of joy. For Jacob, it was the fulfillment of 7 years of waiting. Rachel was scarcely seen during the feast, for tradition required the bride to remain hidden until she was led to the groom. Overcome with happiness and the abundance of wine, Jacob barely noticed Laban's furtive glances or the tension in the faces of some servants. At last, the moment arrived. A young woman, veiled thickly, was brought to him. The torches cast flickering shadows across the scene as Jacob's heart pounded in his chest. He took his bride by the hand, feeling her delicate, hesitant fingers in his own. The walk to the bridal tent felt like a dream, and he could hardly wait to finally call Rachel his own. They entered the darkened chamber, and Jacob, overcome by expectation and the effects of wine, lay with the woman he believed to be his beloved. The night passed in a whirlwind of emotion, and when silence settled outside the tent, it was clear the guests had gone to rest. Jacob slept deeply, soothed by exhaustion and the sweet relief of finally having Rachel at his side. But then came the morning. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the tent, dissolving the shadows of the night. Jacob stirred awake, still feeling the warmth of his wife's body beside him. He smiled and with a light heart turned to look at her. That was when the shock struck him like a sudden blade. It was not Rachel. What he saw beside him made his chest tighten and his blood run cold. Leah, the elder sister, gazed at him with a mixture of fear and resignation. Her eyes avoided his, but the expression on her face confirmed the terrible truth. Jacob leaped out of bed, yanking the covers away and retreating as if he had been struck. His breath quickened. His heart pounded against his ribs. "What is this?" His voice exploded into the morning silence. "What have you done, Leah?" Leah lowered her gaze, unable to meet his eyes. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Fury overtook Jacob. He stormed out of the tent, leaving Leah behind, and strode quickly toward Laban's dwelling. His anger burned like an uncontrollable fire. Upon finding his father-in-law, he grabbed him by the arm and spun him sharply around. "What have you done to me?" Jacob cried, his voice trembling with indignation. "I worked 7 years for Rachel. Why then have you given me Leah?" Laban, showing no sign of remorse, adjusted his robe and replied with an infuriating calm, "Here in our land, it is not our custom to give the younger daughter before the firstborn." Those words fell on Jacob like a crushing weight. He felt betrayed, deceived, manipulated, nothing more than a pawn in Laban's game. "You lied to me," Jacob shouted, clenching his fists. "You made me work all these years for Rachel only to deceive me like this." Laban raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture, but his voice remained cold and calculating. "Complete the bridal week with Leah, and after that I will also give you Rachel, provided that you work for me another 7 years. Jacob felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under him. 7 more years. How could Laban be so cruel, so cunning? How could he toy with his feelings and use him in such a way? He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to calm the storm within. He did not want Leah. He had never wanted Leah, but Rachel, his love for her still burned in his chest. If he refused, he would lose the only woman he had ever truly loved. His heart was torn between rage and hope. Laban's betrayal was complete, but the worst was yet to come. Jacob felt the weight of betrayal crushing his chest. He stepped back from Laban, fists clenched, trying to contain the fury surging through his blood. The man before him remained impassive, as though his dishonesty were nothing more than a trivial detail in a business transaction. But for Jacob, this was not just an unfair deal. It was the ruin of his dreams, the cruel blow that shattered the future he had waited for so long. "How dare you deceive me like this?" Jacob shouted, his voice echoing through the camp. Servants and shepherds paused in their tasks, watching the confrontation unfold. Jacob's eyes blazed with rage, but Laban, with his calculating expression, seemed unfazed. "I've already explained, Jacob," Laban said, crossing his arms. "Here, we do not give the younger daughter before the firstborn." Jacob's voice trembled with indignation. "But you never said that before. You made me work 7 years, made me wait, made me dream, and now you force me to accept something I never asked for." Laban sighed, as if speaking to a stubborn child. "Listen, Jacob," he said coldly. "The marriage has been consummated. Leah is now your wife. But if you still want Rachel, there is a solution." Silence spread between them, heavy and suffocating. Jacob's chest tightened. He already knew he would not like what he was about to hear. "Work for me another 7 years," Laban finally said, his tone carrying a false generosity, "and Rachel will also be your wife." Jacob's body stiffened. Another 7 years. It was a devastating blow. He had already lost so much time, and now he was asked to give even more of his life to a deceitful man. His eyes wandered over the servants watching with pity, over the desert stretching beyond the camp, over Leah's tent, the wife he had never chosen. And then his gaze fell upon Rachel. She stood a little apart, her delicate figure barely visible in the morning shadows. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, filled with both hope and fear. She too had been deceived, and now her future depended on his choice. Jacob closed his eyes. He could run, abandon everything, reject Leah, and leave for good. But what about Rachel? If he left, he would lose her forever. The thought was unbearable. Despair tightened around his chest like a cruel hand. He had always known that love required sacrifice, but he had never imagined the price would be so high. Laban watched in silence, waiting. Jacob drew in a deep breath. There was no other choice. "I accept," he said, each word cutting his pride like a wound. Laban smiled in satisfaction and nodded. "Good. Finish your bridal week with Leah, and then Rachel will be your wife. But remember, Jacob, the 7 years must still be completed." Anger burned in Jacob's heart like bitter poison, but he swallowed it. He would do whatever it took to have Rachel by his side. Yet deep inside, one question lingered. Would he truly accept it, or would he one day find another way? Night fell gently over Laban's camp, and the glow of torches lit the faces of the guests gathered to celebrate Jacob and Rachel's wedding. The aroma of spices lingered in the air, blending with the sound of flutes and songs that echoed beneath the stars. Jacob was radiant. After 14 years of waiting and hardship, he would finally take Rachel as his wife. Time had not diminished his love for her, and his heart pounded as he saw her approaching, wrapped in a fine veil that shimmered in the torchlight. Rachel's deep shining eyes met Jacob's through the folds of the fabric. There was no doubt, no deception. This time, she was the woman he had chosen from the beginning, the one for whom he had endured years of labor and humiliation. Laban, wearing a satisfied smile, watched the ceremony. To him, this marriage was not only a union of love, but also a clever move in his game of ambition. Now both of his daughters were married, and Jacob was firmly bound to his family. The celebration lasted late into the night, filled with dancing and songs in honor of the couple. But someone watched from a distance, silent and heavy-hearted. Leah, seated in the shadows of a tent, witnessed every moment. Though she was the first wife, she knew she had never truly been desired. The way Jacob looked at Rachel was different. His eyes filled with love and devotion, something he had never shown to Leah. She clenched the fabric of her dress and turned away. Her place was secure, yet her heart carried the weight of humiliation. The next morning, Jacob emerged from the bridal tent with a smile on his face. He felt complete, as though God's promise was finally being fulfilled. But his joy was met with an immediate obstacle. Leah was there. She said nothing, only kept her eyes lowered, as if waiting for judgment. Jacob felt a growing unease. Leah was still his wife. How could he divide his life between two women? How could he give attention to the one who had been forced upon him against his will? The following days became a test of endurance. Rachel, aware of Jacob's love for her, made sure to claim her place by his side. She walked with him through the camp, exchanged smiles and caresses, and radiated confidence. Yet beneath her composure, a burden weighed heavily upon her. She could not conceive. Months passed, but no child grew in her womb. Jacob's love did not falter, but the pressure from family and society pressed on her like an unshakable weight. Meanwhile, Leah conceived. The news spread quickly, and the camp erupted with astonishment. The less loved wife now carried Jacob's firstborn. The pain in Rachel's eyes was evident, though she tried to hide it. Jacob too felt the heavy reality. He did not love Leah, yet she had given him a son. Leah in turn felt a bittersweet triumph. At last she had something Rachel did not. But deep inside, she knew that even this would never win Jacob's heart. What had once been a camp of love and hope was now turning into a battlefield of rivalry and tension. The struggle between the sisters was only beginning. Days turned into months, and Jacob's household became a silent battlefield. The love he devoted to Rachel was evident to all, while his treatment of Leah was a burden she carried alone. Every glance, every gesture, every moment made it clear that Jacob regarded her as an obligation rather than a true companion. Yet Leah remained steadfast, carrying the responsibility of being a wife and mother in a home that had never truly belonged to her. Rachel, on the other hand, knew she was loved. She walked through the camp with pride, knowing she was the favorite, the chosen one. But a shadow loomed over her happiness. No matter how much Jacob loved and desired her, she remained barren. With every full moon her hope was renewed, only to be crushed once more. Leah's cries rose to the heavens night after night. She did not ask for riches, nor even for Jacob's love. She only wished to be seen, to be valued, to be recognized as someone worthy of respect. And God heard her. Her womb was filled with life. When the news spread through the camp, the reaction was immediate. Leah had conceived while Rachel remained childless. The older sister now carried Jacob's heir. Leah gave birth to a son and named him Reuben, saying, "The Lord has seen my affliction. Now my husband will love me." But that was not the reality. Jacob's gaze did not change, nor did his affection for Rachel wane. Reuben's birth did not bring the acceptance Leah had hoped for. Even so, God did not abandon her. Once again Leah conceived and bore another son, naming him Simeon, saying, "The Lord has heard that I am despised and has given me this son also." Yet still Jacob remained distant. Leah, persistent in her faith, was blessed with a third son, whom she named Levi, saying, "Now at last my husband will be attached to me." But Jacob kept his distance. Then Leah conceived again and bore a fourth son. She named him Judah, but this time her words were different. "This time I will praise the Lord." Something had changed within her. Before she had sought her husband's approval, but now her heart found rest in the God who saw her and honored her, even when men did not. While Leah bore child after child, Rachel felt increasingly humiliated. Her pride was a fragile armor, shattering with each new son her sister brought into the world. She felt powerless, forgotten by God, and her pain hardened into bitterness. She spent her days in torment, avoiding the sight of the children running through the camp, ignoring the laughter that echoed around her. Every time she saw Jacob holding one of Leah's sons in his arms, a silent fury burned within her. One night, unable to endure it any longer, Rachel confronted Jacob. "Give me children, or I shall die." Jacob, who had treated her with tenderness for so long, burst out in anger. "Am I in the place of God who has withheld children from you?" Rachel felt exposed, as though her deepest shame had been laid bare before everyone. The rivalry between the sisters had reached an irreversible point. The Lord would intervene, but would his hand bring peace, or only more conflict? Jacob's tents were filled with the laughter of children. Leah, the despised wife, was now the mother of 4 sons, each carrying a promise: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, all growing under their mother's watchful eyes. Despite Jacob's indifference, Leah found solace in God's blessing. Rachel, on the other hand, the beloved one, the woman of Jacob's dreams, felt trapped in an ever-tightening shadow. Her womb remained barren, and her soul grew more wounded with each new birth. The humiliation pressed heavier upon her. Leah, the sister who had always lived in her shadow, now walked through the camp with quiet pride, her children running freely, playing around the campfires. Even Jacob, though restrained, could not ignore them. Rachel, however, had only silence and shame. Days turned into years, and every time Leah sensed the first signs of a new pregnancy, Rachel withdrew, unable to bear it. Envy grew in her chest like a consuming fire, smothering what joy she had left. What was the value of Jacob's love if she could not give him children? She watched as Leah sang to her boys while weaving their garments, saw the children run into their mother's arms, and something deep inside her shattered. The pain became unbearable. In her frustration, Rachel began to treat Leah with coldness. What had once been her natural sense of superiority now became a shield to hide her weakness. When the women of the camp spoke of Leah's blessings, Rachel walked away. When the servants commented on the strength of Leah's sons, Rachel silenced them with a single look. Yet none of this eased her agony. One day, consumed by despair, Rachel could no longer hold back her anguish. With tears in her eyes and a trembling voice, she approached Jacob and cried, "Give me children, or I will die." Her plea was not just a request, but a cry of pain, an echo of her broken soul. Jacob, caught off guard, erupted in anger. He, a man who had faced so many trials and who had waited years for Rachel, could not bear to be blamed for something only God controlled. "Am I in the place of God who has kept you from conceiving?" he shouted. The silence that followed was piercing. Rachel looked away, and Jacob's words cut her like a wound. She could not accept this fate. She could not allow Leah to continue prevailing while she, the beloved one, remained empty. That night Rachel did not sleep. As the camp sank into darkness, Her mind raced. She needed a solution. Then she remembered the story of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Like her, Sarah had been barren for many years, and in her anguish she had offered her servant Hagar to bear a child in her place. Rachel saw her answer. The next morning, determined and without hesitation, she presented her servant Bilhah to Jacob. "Take my servant as a wife. She will conceive in my place, and through her I will have children." Jacob looked at Rachel in surprise, but the desperation in his beloved's eyes was undeniable. He knew that Rachel's desire for a child was greater than anything, and so Bilhah was given to him. How far was Rachel willing to go to change her fate? Rachel watched every detail of Bilhah's pregnancy with keen eyes. Though she did not carry the child in her own womb, she felt that victory was near. When the first signs of labor appeared, her heart raced. At last she would have a child to call her own. Bilhah gave birth to a son, and Rachel took him into her arms with tears in her eyes. "His name shall be Dan," she declared, "for God has judged me and heard my voice." The camp was soon filled with murmurs. Leah, watching in silence, felt a weight in her chest. Rachel now held a son of her own, a child whom Jacob welcomed with affection. But the rivalry was far from over. Time passed, and Bilhah bore Jacob another son. Growing ever more proud, Rachel lifted the child in her arms. "His name shall be Naphtali," she said, "for I have wrestled with my sister and prevailed." Leah heard those words and felt a shiver run through her. Was this her defeat? Her heart clenched as she saw Jacob smiling at Rachel's sons. The decision struck her like lightning. If Rachel could use her servant to bear children, then Leah would do the same. That very night she approached Jacob and declared firmly, "Take my servant Zilpah as a wife, so that I too may have more children through her." Jacob, weary of the rivalry between the sisters, nodded in silence. Soon Zilpah conceived, and when the child was born, Leah smiled and said, "His name shall be Gad, for great fortune has come to me." Days later, the servant conceived again, and bore another son. "His name shall be Asher," Leah said triumphantly, "for I am happy, and women will call me blessed." The camp had now become a battlefield of silent rivalry, jealousy burning like fire, and the children of each woman became tokens in this unspoken war. One afternoon, Reuben, Leah's firstborn, returned from the fields carrying mandrakes, roots known for their association with fertility. When Rachel saw them, she could not suppress her longing. "Give me some of your son's mandrakes," she pleaded with Leah. Leah stared at her coldly. "Is it not enough that you have taken my husband? Now you also want my son's mandrakes?" Rachel took a deep breath. She needed those roots. "If you give me the mandrakes, Jacob will lie with you tonight," she offered. Leah hesitated for a moment, then accepted the deal. That night, as Jacob returned from the fields, Leah went out to meet him. "Tonight you will be with me," she said with determination, "for I have bought you with my son's mandrakes." Jacob did not argue and entered her tent. How long would this battle between sisters continue? Jacob's camp was filled with the laughter of children. The sons of Leah, Zilpah, and Bilhah ran between the tents while their mothers exchanged glances of pride and rivalry. Leah had already given Jacob 6 sons: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. In addition, her servant Zilpah had borne Gad and Asher, while Bilhah, Rachel's servant, had borne Dan and Naphtali. Yet despite so many children, Rachel remained anguished. Though she was the most beloved wife, the pain of infertility consumed her. She saw Jacob's gaze soften whenever he looked at Leah and her children, and she felt the heavy burden of frustration. Rachel tried to find joy in the sons Bilhah had given her, but the emptiness remained. She watched as Leah cradled little Zebulun and wondered if she would ever have that chance. Jacob, always patient, tried to comfort her. "Rachel, my love for you does not depend on children," he said, holding her hands. But Rachel longed for a child of her own. While she struggled with her pain, Leah, already the mother of many, was blessed once again. Tears filled her eyes when she realized she was carrying another child. When her daughter was born, Leah held her in her arms and whispered, "Her name shall be Dinah." Yet even with so many children, Jacob's love remained with Rachel. Nothing seemed to change that. Then one day Rachel felt something different. Her body was changing, and as time passed, the signs became undeniable. She was pregnant. The news spread quickly, and the camp filled with murmurs. Leah watched from a distance, hiding her emotions, while Jacob was overcome with joy. "The Lord has heard my cry," Rachel whispered as tears streamed down her face. Months passed, and at last the long-awaited day arrived. The pains of childbirth were intense, but Rachel endured them with hope. Then the newborn's cry filled the tent. Jacob took the baby in his arms and looked at Rachel with a smile. "A son, Rachel. Our son." She gazed at him with tenderness and whispered, "His name shall be Joseph, for the Lord has added to me a son." Now that Rachel had a child, would she finally find peace? Years passed, and Jacob's camp grew. His children played among the flocks, while his wives tended to the tents and daily tasks. Joseph, Rachel's long-awaited son, grew healthy in his mother's arms, and for the first time she displayed a happiness she had never known before. Yet despite the joy within his home, Jacob felt the heavy weight of servitude. He had labored for 14 years, first for Leah, then for Rachel, but now he longed for something more: freedom. One day Jacob approached Laban, who was seated near the livestock pens. "Allow me to leave," Jacob said firmly. "I have fulfilled my duty and served you faithfully. I want to take my family and begin my own journey." Laban frowned. He knew Jacob's presence had brought him blessings, for since his son-in-law had arrived, his flocks had prospered like never before. "Stay, Jacob," Laban insisted. "I know that God favors you, and because of you my wealth has increased. Name your wages, and I will pay them." Jacob pondered carefully. He knew his father-in-law was cunning, always seeking profit at the expense of others. But Jacob was no longer a naive young man. "I want nothing from you," Jacob said. "Only allow me to keep the speckled, spotted, and dark-colored animals from your flock. The pure white ones will remain yours." Laban smiled, seeing an advantage. He knew that most animals were born without blemishes, and to him it seemed a fair deal. "It is agreed," Laban said, shaking Jacob's hand. But as always, Laban had a plan. That very night he ordered his sons to take the best speckled animals far away, separating them from the herd so Jacob would have little chance of success. Jacob realized the betrayal, yet he did not lose faith. He trusted that God was with him. He began to apply an unusual technique. He cut branches from trees, peeled them to expose white stripes, and placed them in the watering troughs where the animals came to drink and mate. Miraculously, the newborn animals were speckled and spotted, exactly what he needed. Month after month, Jacob's flock grew, and the strongest animals always belonged to him, while the weaker ones remained with Laban. Laban watched in astonishment and fury. How could Jacob be prospering so greatly? Laban's sons began to murmur among themselves, "Jacob has stolen our father's wealth." Laban's attitude toward Jacob shifted. Favoritism and friendly words turned into envy and resentment. Jacob sensed the atmosphere changing. What had once been a working arrangement was now becoming a trap. One night as he slept, Jacob had a dream. God appeared to him and said, "Rise, Jacob, return to the land of your fathers, and I will be with you." When Jacob awoke, he knew the time had come. He could no longer trust Laban. But how could he flee without being stopped? Would Jacob once again allow himself to be deceived, or would this time be different? Dawn brought an irrevocable decision. Jacob looked at his vast flock, his wives and his children, knowing he could no longer remain under Laban's control. God had called him back to the land of his fathers, but with that calling came a terrifying fear: the reunion with Esau. Knowing that Laban would not allow his departure easily, Jacob planned his escape carefully. He waited until Laban was far away, busy shearing his sheep, and then gathered all his possessions, servants, and family. Rachel, his beloved wife, cast one last glance at her father's land before leaving, but before setting out she secretly took something: Laban's household idols. The caravan departed in the dead of night, moving swiftly along dusty trails, guided only by the light of the stars. But Jacob knew he could not run forever. 3 days later, Laban discovered Jacob had left. Fury burned in his heart, and he gathered his men to pursue him. For 7 days they rode tirelessly until they finally caught up with Jacob at the foothills of the mountains of Gilead. Laban burst out in anger. "How dare you flee like a thief? Why have you stolen my idols?" Jacob, surprised, furrowed his brow. He had stolen nothing, but before he could answer, Rachel had hidden the idols under her saddle and sat upon them. When Laban searched the tents, she pretended to be unwell and did not rise, deceiving her father. After a heated argument, Jacob and Laban reached an agreement. They erected a pillar of stones as a witness that they would not harm each other. "From this day forward may the Lord watch between us when we are apart," Laban said, looking into Jacob's eyes. And so Laban departed, returning to his land while Jacob continued on his journey toward the unknown. Now with Laban out of the way, Jacob turned his attention to an even greater fear. Esau, the brother he had deceived, the one who had sworn to kill him. Jacob sent messengers ahead carrying gifts and words of humility, but when the messengers returned, his blood ran cold. "Esau is coming to meet you," they said, "and he is bringing 400 men." Jacob felt the crushing weight of fear upon his chest. He had no army, only wives, children, and defenseless servants. In anguish, Jacob fell to his knees. "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac," he cried, "you commanded me to return to my land, and I have obeyed, but I am unworthy of all the blessings you have given me. Deliver me from Esau's wrath, for I fear he will come and destroy everything I have." After praying, he divided his caravan into 2 groups, thinking, if Esau attacks one group, the other may escape. And then, in one last desperate act, he sent servants ahead with gifts for his brother, flocks, goats, rams, and camels, all carefully chosen to appease Esau's fury. As night fell, Jacob was left alone, awaiting the dawn that would seal his fate. But an even greater danger awaited him on the road ahead. The dust had not yet settled from Jacob's hurried departure when a storm of anger and suspicion caught up with him. Laban, accompanied by his men, advanced furiously, his eyes burning and his heart filled with indignation. For 7 days he pursued Jacob through the desert trails until he finally cornered him in the mountains of Gilead. "How dare you flee in secret like a thief in the dead of night?" Laban roared, glaring at Jacob with restrained rage. "I would have sent you off with a feast, with songs and tambourines." Jacob crossed his arms, standing firm. "I fled because I feared you would stop me from leaving with my family. I worked hard for you for 20 years, and yet you treat me like a stranger." Laban narrowed his eyes. "Then why did you steal my idols?" A heavy silence followed. Jacob frowned in confusion. "Steal them. Let whoever took them die," he declared without hesitation, unaware of the secret hidden so close to him. As Laban's men searched each tent, Rachel sat calmly atop a camel's saddle, pressing her fingers against the worn leather. Beneath it lay her father's idols, well hidden. Her heart pounded like an unsteady drum. When Laban approached, she looked up at him sweetly and sighed, "Forgive me, my father, but I cannot rise. The way of women is upon me." Laban hesitated. Tradition forbade him from forcing her to move in such a state. With one last suspicious glance, he moved on, unaware that his own daughter had deceived him. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, suppressing a shiver. She knew Jacob would never have approved of her act. But why had she taken the idols? Was it revenge against her manipulative father, or a final threat of attachment to her childhood home? Laban found nothing, yet he still carried himself with superiority. "Everything you see around you is mine," he said, gazing at Jacob's flocks and children. "But may the Lord judge between us." Weary from years of injustice, Jacob rose with fury. "I worked for you day and night, enduring the cold and the heat, being deceived countless times. If it were not for the God of my father, you would have sent me away empty-handed." His words hung heavy in the air, cutting through the silence with undeniable truth. Laban realized he no longer had control over Jacob. With no other choice, he proposed a pact. A heap of stones was raised as a witness between them. "May the Lord watch between us when we are apart," Laban declared solemnly. Jacob agreed, and the 2 men shared a meal, sealing the covenant. The next morning, Laban kissed his daughters and grandchildren and departed, vanishing on the horizon. But as Jacob watched the dust settle, a chill ran down his spine. Laban was a defeated enemy, but another danger still awaited him. And deeper still, a mystery lingered. What was Rachel hiding, and why? The wind howled over the mountains of Gilead as if nature itself sensed the weight of the revelation about to unfold. Jacob, still unsettled from his confrontation with Laban, felt restless. Something in Laban's words lingered in his mind. As night fell, Laban approached, this time without fury, but with a heavy look, burdened by something he had carried for years. "Jacob," his voice was strangely low. "There is something I never told you." Jacob crossed his arms, waiting. "Rachel!" Laban hesitated as though the words burned inside him. "She was already promised to another man before you ever arrived in my land." The revelation struck Jacob like a blow to the chest. "What?" His voice came out hoarse. "How dare you hide this from me?" Laban lowered his eyes. When you first saw Rachel and your heart filled with love for her, it was already too late. Her fate had been sealed, but I needed time. If that man returned to claim her, I would have had to give her away. He never came back, and I saw an opportunity." Jacob felt his blood boil. "An opportunity? You deceived me. You used the lives of your daughters like pieces in a game." Laban raised a hand. "And Leah, do you think she wasn't a victim too?" Jacob froze. Leah, who had remained silent until then, lowered her head. "Since I was a child, I was told I would never be chosen," she murmured, her voice trembling. "But my father promised he would find a fate for me. That night when I was given to you, I knew I would never be loved, but at least I would have a husband." The pain in Leah's eyes pierced Jacob in an unexpected way. He had never stopped to think about how much she had suffered too. But before Jacob could respond, Rachel stepped forward, her face pale with fury and hurt. "And me?" she shouted, her eyes blazing. "Was my life decided without my consent? I was promised to another man, and no one told me." Laban looked at his daughter, and for the first time he seemed ashamed. "I did what I thought was best for our family," Rachel laughed bitterly. "Best for whom? For us, or for your game of manipulation?" Her chest rose and fell rapidly. Then she turned to Jacob. "And you, do you still believe that everything we lived was real?" Silence fell between them. Jacob looked at Rachel, then at Leah, and realized that his entire story was stained by lies. He had not truly won Rachel as he believed. Leah had not chosen to be there, and Rachel had been deceived just as much as he had. Everything they thought was real had been a lie. And now, the night was filled only with the sound of the wind blowing over the hills of Gilead, carrying the weight of truth into the silence between them. Jacob felt the weight of truth pressing on his shoulders. For years he had believed he was fighting only for Rachel's love, but now he saw that God had been guiding his journey in ways he could never have imagined. Walking alone through the camp, his mind raced. He had always thought his life was nothing more than a struggle between himself and Laban, but now he realized there was something far greater at work. "God," he whispered, looking up at the starry sky, "I have always fought for what I wanted, never realizing that you already had a plan." At that moment, he understood he had not chosen Leah, but God had chosen her to be the mother of a nation. He had fought for Rachel, but God had allowed his heart to mature. Everything that had happened, no matter how painful, carried a purpose. Meanwhile, inside the tent, Leah and Rachel sat together. The resentment between them had been as old as their marriage itself, but now, faced with the truth, something had shifted. "I never wanted to take your place, Rachel," Leah said softly, "but I always knew I was never the chosen one." Rachel looked at her sister, feeling for the first time a compassion she had never allowed herself before. "I suffered too," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I always fought to be first in Jacob's life, and when I finally bore a son, I realized it still wasn't enough." Leah reached out and touched Rachel's hand. "A man's love could never bring the peace we were searching for." Her words echoed deeply in Rachel's heart. All her life she had believed that being loved by Jacob would make her whole, but now she saw that the love she had truly been missing came from God, and for the first time the sisters embraced, without rivalry. The next morning Jacob gathered his family. He looked at Leah and Rachel, realizing that something within them had changed. "We will set out for the land that God has promised us," he announced. "But this time, not as rivals or enemies, we will go together as a restored family." Laban in turn realized he had lost control over his daughter's fate. "May the God of Abraham and Isaac be with you, Jacob," he said at last, finally letting go. And with that, Jacob, his wives, his children, and his flocks set out toward the future God had prepared for them. Years passed, and Jacob, now older and wiser, sat in the shade of a great date palm. His eyes, marked by years of time and trials, scanned the camp before him. He saw his children, the sons of Leah, of Rachel, and of the servants, all growing into prosperous tribes, just as God had promised. He remembered the pain that had accompanied him for so many years, the struggle for Rachel, the rivalry between the sisters, Laban's dishonesty. Yet now, as he looked at his great family, he saw something greater. The grace of God had triumphed over it all. Jacob watched Joseph, his beloved son, helping his brothers organize the livestock. He recalled how Rachel had once suffered for being unable to bear children, and how in the end God had blessed her with Joseph and Benjamin. He also thought of Leah, who, though once rejected, had become the mother of 6 tribes of Israel, including Judah, from whom the Messiah would one day be born. The story of his life had not been written by chance. Every pain, every betrayal, every tear had served a greater purpose. Jacob lifted his eyes to the heavens. "Now I understand, Lord," he whispered. "What seemed like deception was, in truth, your hand guiding me toward the destiny you had prepared." His sons, who had once carried the burden of their mother's rivalry, were now learning to walk together. The promise made to Abraham and Isaac was being fulfilled through them. The people of Israel were being formed, not through disputes, but through the grace of God. The cycle of hatred had been broken, and grace had triumphed over betrayal. But what would the future still hold for Jacob and his sons?